All right, we are back. We are Game 2015 in the winter 2018 semester. That's okay. And we are week 7, I think, part 1 of our broadcast. And it's we're going to set up Google VR with Unity for some people who've never done it, or we've kind of talked about it, but there are some issues. We should talk about the issues. But before we get started, I want to talk about administration stuff. So assignment number 2, that's with Ilir for your Agile stuff, is up. And you have to basically, submit your pivotal tracker information that he's asked you for. I will be putting up the next lab, which is going to cover the alpha release that you're going to submit to me. I need, again, your GitHub link, if you could. Zip archive of your files, if you can manage it, if they're not like massive, right? And then, your updated game design document. That's due all tonight at midnight, right? Also, I'm going to put up your next evaluation. Your peer evaluation will be up also by midnight tonight, where you can submit your evaluation for how everyone's doing. All that kind of stuff is due tonight. Next week, Friday, there'll be no class because of Good Friday, right? So the campus will be closed. So just a reminder of that. What I will do, though, is I do have a lab on Wednesdays between 4 and 6. So if you're interested in attending that lab, it's in room C422, right? So if you want to come to that lab, there's lots of room. I've got, Wednesday would be the next time we can get together if you want to be in that lab, right? Where I will do the next piece. I'm going to do some stuff in there. I will record on Wednesday next week as opposed to Friday because it won't be a Friday session. Okay, just let you know. That's next week. All right, so just let you guys know about that. I'll be recording the Wednesday class. So that way, just in case you guys can't make it and it clashes with your schedule or something, then you'll still have what I've got. Okay? So that's what's happening Wednesday. Again, no Friday class next week. All right, so today, a couple things I want to do is, if you look up on Slack, I've put the latest version of Google VR, that package, up on Slack. So if you take a look, if you look at all files, so if I take a look at here, all files, today I put up a couple files. One of them was the Google VR for Unity 1.30.1, which is the latest package that was released recently, right? So if you don't have that, that's what I'm going to be using today. JDK 8161, which I recommend, is the right one for us to set up Google VR with Unity, as well as a little wiki on Xbox 360 controllers, how we connect them to Unity, because I'll be using one today. I have one with me. I have 2 with me. One that I'm going to be connecting to a test phone. I've got a test phone, it's Samsung Galaxy S7 that I'm using to test with, right? Not really. It's got really hot when I was running the app. Just be careful, seriously. These apps, remember, they're not debugged properly and everything else. So if you leave them on, they smoke the phone. Like because they're really GPU intensive, right? So just a note on that. And then I want to, if we have time today, I want to hit that new post-processing 2 stack that hasn't been released yet on Unity, but they've got it in GitHub in beta. So I want to kind of look at that today, which can add a little bit of life to your scenes, adding some post-processing effect like bloom and color correction and a bunch of other stuff. So I want to kind of talk about that today. So that's what I have. But what I want you today, so in-class exercise, if you haven't had a chance to already, I want you to deploy to your app, the current app that you're making for your alpha. I want to deploy it to phone if you haven't had a chance to do that, okay? Also, there will be an exercise. I want you guys to follow along how to set up and deploy to a phone today with Unity. So even if you're not deploying your app, or if you've already done it, do it again. All right, like as if you've never done it before, because I want you guys to have practice and understand the challenges in doing this, as opposed to not. All right, so we're going to set up a new project. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to start from scratch, just as if we've never done this before. And so that's why it's a clean recording. You guys have this thing, so you guys can always refer back to this thing, right? I'm going to set up a new project, which is GAME2015-W2018, and it's lesson 7C. It's going to be a 3D Unity project, Unity 3D. I'm going to click Create. I'm not going to turn on analytics, like normal, because we were just using a project for testing. Now, things that you need for today's this session to work. If you don't have your own laptop, you need at least a Unity version that's version 2017.2 and higher, right, for this to work, as is this recording anyway. You also need, in your Unity, you need standard assets. Because I'm going to be asking for standard assets today. So if you don't have standard assets installed in your Unity, you're going to have to get them from the asset store, right? So the ones that are in front of you may not have standard assets for whatever reason. And I think it's important to do that. All right, so I've got my Unity up and with a default scene right now. And what I want to do is I want to use that package. So please go to Slack, where I've put the first package, which is Google VR for Unity. This one downloaded from Slack. It's about 36 megs, right? So if you grab that, so we're on the same page here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Assets. Actually, you know what I will do? Hopefully this will help. I'm going to go to Display Settings. Hopefully this won't mess with my recording. And I want to change from 100% to 175% for a second. All right, so there's my display settings. I'm changing them up because it'll be too difficult for you to see what I'm doing. That should be a little better for you guys. All right, so again, I want to go to Assets. I want to go to Import Package, Custom Package. And I'm going to grab that package that I've got here in my downloads. I'm just going to press OK, open. And what this is going to do is the latest package from Google. It's going to upload or install this thing right here. I'm going to import all. I'm not going to be selective here, right? So it's going to install the package. And what this is going to do inside my assets folder is it's going to give me the Google VR, the whole Google VR package. It's going to modify some of my my editor options, which you're going to see. For example, up here on the top, it's added a Google VR menu. For today's demonstration, I'm working with a PC with 16 gigs of RAM, an i7, and a terabyte SSD, right? Just to guys let you know what's happening. All right, so here's the Google VR part. You can see that there's a new menu up here. And I've got this Google VR folder. To prepare, I know I'm going to need some standard assets. So what I want to do is go to Assets, Import Package, and I want to import the characters package. So please do that with me. If you don't already have it installed, you have to go to the asset store and grab the standard package from the asset store. Unfortunately, some of these machines don't have. If you're working with a machine in front of you in the lab and not on your personal machine, it may have a Unity version that hasn't been completely installed. They only install the bare minimum, right? Also, sometimes they don't install the different platforms, like for example, the Android platform or iOS. That may also be missing. You may have to install that. So we'll see as we go. This is something we have to make sure that's installed in your Unity. Typically, when I install Unity, I install everything, right? And I recommend that. If you have a laptop that has space and you're using Unity for the first time, install it all. I mean, I think it's just better. It saves you time later on. Okay, so that's the standard asset for characters. I also want to install another one. I want to go to Assets, and I want to go to Import Package, and I want to include the prototyping package. And I'm going to use that later on when I'm testing out my controller. So my controller, by default, if you use an Xbox controller, it won't necessarily move your first-person character. It won't do it by default. We have to change a few settings for it to happen, right? We're not making any code changes today. We're going to make some changes inside the input manager in order for our controller to work. Also, just to note, I did make my Xbox One S controller with Bluetooth work with my Samsung Galaxy S7 phone. So it works fine, right? So I can move along with it and everything else. If you have any kind of, you need to have the Xbox One S controller because it's the only one that has Bluetooth and higher. Or you can, if you have a double-ended micro USB cable that goes from your phone to the Xbox controller. So let's say it's a regular Xbox One controller, then that would work as well. It's going to connect directly and you'll be good. You have USB support. But then you're going to have a cable that goes from your headgear all the way down to your controller. which is kind of, I think, less effective. All right, so we've got these assets installed, and I want to set up my default project. Before I begin, of course, I want to set up some standard folders I always use. I'm going to make the first folder, which is underscore scenes. And I'm going to do another one, which is underscore scripts, just in case I want to add some custom scripts. I will definitely use this other one, which is a prefabs folder, because I'm going to make some player prefabs and so on. So that's the first thing that I'm going to kind of set up. All right, now, inside my Google VR project, there is a demos folder. Please go there, demos. In demos, go into scenes. And in scenes, there's something called Hello VR. Let's go to that one. So we've kind of seen this before. So here's my Hello VR project. However, I don't want to mess this up. I want to use this, just in case I have to go back and reform everything. Let's leave these scenes in place. So let's save scene as. So file, save scene as. And I'm going to go into scenes and then just say something like GVR demo. That's going to be the scene. So I set that up under scenes. And that way, I don't have to work with these scenes. They're just demo scenes. I want to work with my own. I'm going to double click this one to make sure I'm in my Google VR demo project, which is right here now. Okay, so I don't need this anymore. Well, in my Google VR project, I have my player. And my player has several different assets or different components that are part of him, right? He's got his main camera, and there's also something called a GVR controller pointer. I want to move these into another kind of character. We have a new character we just made. We got some standard assets character. Let's go in there and add a new standard asset. So again, what I want to do is I want to drag an asset in there. So I'm going to go to my standard assets. I'm going to go to characters. And we're going to go to first-person characters. Now, there's prefabs. And inside prefabs, I mentioned before that you can probably run it with FPS controller. You know what? After doing some testing, I have to say that that was wrong. I recommend not using FPS controller. I recommend using rigid body FPS controller instead. And I'll tell you why. Because when you have your headgear on and you're moving your stick, and then you turn your head and then you move your stick again, it doesn't follow. Right? It does not follow where you're looking if you're using a regular FPS controller. Whereas if you use a rigid body FPS controller, it does follow where you're looking. So that's why you need to use that. So I'm going to pull in this rigid body FPS controller into the scene. Again, pulling it somewhere so it's not a child of anything else in the scene. And notice it also comes with the main camera by default. So what I want to do here, I'm just going to pull it closer to the player. What I want to do here is I want to take the player's components that are currently under the player, and I want to drag this GVR controller pointer. I want to drag it into our own rigid body FPS controller. So I'm just moving that GVR controller pointer in there as a component. I'm just changing the components up. So the child, which belonged to the player, that was in the default Google VR scene, I'm just pulling it over. Also, inside the main camera, there is another component that the main camera has, which is a GVR reticle pointer. I'm going to take this reticle pointer and pull it into the camera, the new camera that we have right now. There we are. All right. One other thing that's part of my default Google project is in the main camera, you can see that there is a default GVR pointer physics ray. I have to also include this inside my camera, but I got to add it manually. So I'm going to go to my main camera, and I'm going to go to Add Component, and I'm going to search for GVR. So here's GVR. And I want this last component down here, which is GVR Pointer Physics Raycaster. And so that way I can have the same, pretty much the same functionality from one camera to the other. Now that I've done this, both my player and my camera from the old version can disappear. I can just delete them. And now I have my rigid body FPS controller, which is my new player. So I might as well rename this to player. I'll just rename this to player. And when I've done that, so I'm just going to tag it as a player. Might as well tag it as a player as well. Here we are. So it's tagged as a player. And I don't want to save this scene right now, right, as my scene, because they would overwrite my GVR demo scene, and maybe I want to go back and use it again for whatever reason. So I'm going to go File, save scene as, and as a new scene, I'm going to save this as because this is the scene that I really want to use, right? So this is my Google VR main scene. That's my Google VR main scene. So this is no longer the GVR demo scene. It's my main scene. So I made a copy, right? Now, always good to do, guys. Like whenever you start off a scene, you're doing some kind of experiment, make a new scene, copy it, right? There's nothing wrong with doing that. And what that will do for you is it protects you, right? Because remember, from a GitHub perspective, you can't work on the same scene at the same time, right? But what you can do is make a copy of the scene, work on the stuff that you want, and then drag and drop stuff into your scene later on. All right, so my player is intact, but I don't want to do all that work again with my player. I want to definitely grab this player, and I want to pull him into my prefabs folder. So this player right now, he's in my prefabs folder. Now I've got a player prefab. So I can, if I ever need that player prefab again, and by the way, I will later on today, right? I might as well make a player prefab. All right, we're pretty good so far. And if we run the actual scene, we shouldn't get any errors, right? You can see that I can move my mouse around now. And if I press the WASD keys, I can kind of move around. Notice that this is a rigid body first-person controller. So sometimes what will happen is you might get stuck, like in this wall. The reason why is because the wall isn't formed out properly. And sometimes what happens, see how I'm skipping around here like this? It's because of the nature of the controller. Different kind of controller than a regular FPS controller. Okay, just FYI. All right, cool. So our scene works, but we need to put it in Android. And now here's where the fun begins. Okay. First of all, before we do any kind of Android anything, right? It won't work unless inside of your edit preferences, please go to edit preferences and look at external tools. In external tools, you'll see a section down here that should be empty if you haven't configured it before. Take a look, please. This part right here should be empty. Anyone have an empty part right here? If you don't, if you've already configured it, one thing that worked for me is JDK version 1.80161. That's the version that worked for me. Don't try version 1.9 or 1.10. That won't work. I don't think Google VR supports it at this time. Only 1.8161 and lower. And I believe might as well use 1.161 because there's some bugs that have been worked out. So that's the first thing. But where do I get it? Well, I've already put it up on Slack for you, but you can also get it from, if I download Java JDK, if you go there, and if you look at the Oracle website, you want to grab 161 Windows 64, which is what I got, right? And it's about 206 megs, so I mean, that's why I put it up on Slack, so you don't have to go do it yourself. It's there for you. So download that, accept the user license, and away you go. So that's the first thing. So part one of difficulty, what you want to do is you want to look inside of your JDKs. If I browse mine, you can see that I have several of them, right? But you want this one. You don't want 1.0904. You don't want 10. You don't want these two for sure, 100%. They will not work, right? You want these ones, okay? And specifically this one is something that's worked for me. Okay, so that's the first part. Next, Android, okay? So again, my Android was found at C program files, x86 Android, and then Android SDK. That's where it's found for me. So you should have that as well. Now the machines in front of you should all have Android installed. If you're using your laptop, then the expectation is you've already downloaded the SDKs for Android. And because we have mobile apps together, mobile fundamentals, you should have already downloaded and installed this stuff into your machine anyway. Things you need for this build. You need build tools, at least 2502 and higher, okay? Nothing lower. If you go for 23, build tools that are 23 and lower, they will not work. You need to have 2502 specifically in your build or higher, okay? 27 will work. It does work? Yeah, but you need to go 2502 and higher, okay? And you don't have it? Okay, I'll put it up on Slack for you. Seriously. No Android? At all? Those machines in front of you don't have Android? Oh man, I'm so sorry. The other thing is that so that's in your build tools. In your platform tools, you also have to have sorry, not platform tools. In your platforms, you also have to have Android 25, 26, and 27, like in this range. So if you don't have these, the platforms and the build tools, then you won't be able to run this at all. And if you don't have Android, then you won't be able to run anything, right? So just follow along, and then you can see it. And do you have a laptop at home? Then do it on your laptop at home. All right, so with this configured, when you do browse, if everything worked, then it should show up here. If it doesn't work, or if the paths can't be found, then Unity will complain. It'll say, "Wah, sorry, it can't. This doesn't work." So that's the next part. So the first part is those things have to work, or else you're going to have Gradle build errors. Okay, so that's really the first part of the Android process. Get Java and Android, the SDKs installed in your machine. That's bad. It won't work properly. Huh?
They only have the build tools for 23, and there's no studio. It's 23, 19 from 1.
Yeah, that's not cool. It won't work. So again, I don't know, Michael, if I drag and drop some of that stuff onto, I don't know how big they are. Actually, let me just check and see how big it is. So it's under C:\program files. x86 is what we said. Android and Android SDK. And if I go just build tools alone, I'm just going to show you this how big it is, if I'm not wrong. Build tools alone are 1.5 gigs right now, the ones I have there, and platforms will be something insane. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So just under a gig. So maybe like a couple gigs. Just there. So I wouldn't be able to transfer this stuff. It's just too big. So this is the stuff that you need to have. Now, the next part. I want to switch platforms. By default, remember, Unity uses PC, Mac, Linux build. We're going to go to File, Build Settings. And what I want to do here is I want to switch from PC, Mac, Linux to Android. Okay? When I get there, immediately I want to click Switch Platform. And this takes a little bit of time. All right? So what it'll do is it'll start recompiling scripts and all that stuff so it's compatible with Android, does some stuff in the back end, because it's preparing for you to be able to do a build of Android. Now, this can take some time. On my system, it usually takes a few minutes. On slower systems with a regular hard drive, it might take a lot more time. Okay. Is that going to help, Colin?
Yeah.
What does that do?
That's build tools 25.
That's all it is? Yeah. Good.
The only place I can find it is for a couple hours before you should.
Yeah. Build tools 25, you need platform 25 too. So if you don't have platform.
Was just a difficult one to find unless you use Android Studio.
Yeah. Yep. So let's see how this goes. So yeah, as you can see, it takes quite a bit of time. We want to add my open scene here. So right now I can see it's GVR main. That's what I called it. Okay. And I want to click build. But before I do that, I want to go to player settings. So here's some problems. So this would be step 3. Step 3 is change your platforms. Step 1, get your Java. Step 2, get your Android stuff. Step 3, change your platforms. Step 4, this won't fly, guys, at all. This player setting, this default company stuff, you have to change it so it's something different. And usually what you want to make it something unique. Like, for example, in our case, it's George Brown. You might make your own company name. Product name is way too long. It's way too long. We'll just call this like GVR GAME2015, which is this is our GAME2015 project. I called it something different previously. Then what you want to do is you want to scroll down into this bottom section, and you want to go to other settings. And when you scroll down, you'll see that there's some settings here we have to modify. One of them is this right here under identification. We have to change our package name as well. So it should be something like CA. It's reverse domain naming. So CA Georgian or George College, George Brown College. That'll be okay. In another time zone, George Brown, and then dot or GVR, I don't know, something like 2018 or whatever. There we go. And then down in here is also important. Minimum API level. I mean, I recommend something at least API 19 and higher. 21 has worked for me before with this thing already. And I installed my phone is 23 Marshmallow. So anything like 19 and higher should be okay. Anything lower than 19 won't work. Okay? Not that I've been able to do anyway. Okay? Leave this automatic highest installed as selected as well. I'm going to scroll down here. The last change that I want you to make down here is where it says Android gamepad support. Don't just choose works with D-pad, also choose supports gamepad. And what that'll do is allow us to use a gamepad, a real Xbox, kind of controller, right? So that's what this does. All right, cool. So we've got that piece. Let's just close that up, that little section. So I'm going to click on other settings up here to close it up, to collapse it. Then I'm going to go to XR settings. So again, 1, 2, which is so 1 is Java, 2 is Android, 3 is switch platforms, 4 is change your some of your naming settings and so on. And the last part to make sure everything goes is your XR settings here. You want to switch on virtual reality supported. And you want to click this little plus button and choose cardboard. Once you've done this, you've done most of the things that you need to do in order for your Android project to be supported. Okay? Now, we're going to do build, not build and run yet, build. When I click build, it takes me to my assets folder. I recommend having another folder called builds. Builds, all right? So this way, what you can use with your GitHub, you can create a git ignore file that ignores builds, right? Because builds are massive. I just added 2 folders for whatever reason. Let's delete one. Let's delete a folder. I only need 1 folder, this one. And I'm going to rename it to builds. So inside your builds folder is where I'm going to put everything. I'm just going to call this, just for simplicity, GVR today, .apk. Okay? Now, here's the test. This is where, Colin, we had a problem on Wednesday. And you can see now, once it looks at the SDK tools and everything else, you should not get a Gradle build error if you followed my instructions. If you did something else, if you tried a higher version of Java because you think it's cool, or if you tried, changing, not having the right build tools inside of your Androids, SDK and so on, it's just going to fail, and it's going to keep failing for you, and it's going to make you very frustrated, right? So you need to have this in place in order for it to work properly. Now this takes a little bit of time, and I'm doing the build first, and I'll tell you why. I do the build first before I do my build and run, because I want to know that it's going to build properly and compile, right? Then I'm going to do it again when I do my build and run. In order for you to do your build and run, you must have, in this case, an Android phone. You should have a USB cable, right, connecting to your Android phone from regular USB to micro USB. And your phone must be in developer mode, okay? So you also must accept the fact that your phone is going to trust your computer, all right? All those kinds of things. So please, if the phone, when it connects to the computer, says, hey, do you want me to trust the computer? And you say no, you'll never connect the phone to the machine, and it will not show up, okay, as part of the list here. So again, just to prepare, what I'm doing is I have my little demo phone. You can see that it worked. So there's it built, right? And what I want to do here is, there's 2 ways to do this. I could connect my phone and drag and drop my GVR.apk into my phone, and it would work. That's one way of doing it. The other way to do it, I'll do it the hard way, right? That's the easy way, is plug in my phone, which I'm doing right now, right? So there's my phone plugged in. You can see that it says Samsung Galaxy S7. That's my test phone, right? I'm going to swipe my screen, and it says allow access to device data. Please say yes. Please say allow, right? If you don't say allow, then what's going to happen is it just won't allow you to do drag and drop. It won't allow you to connect to the phone, and this is a bad thing. Okay, so that's the first thing. So my Google VR, I'm going to make it build and run now. So if over here where it says build, I'm going to click build and run. It's going to do the whole build process again and save over my APK. That's okay. It's doing it the long way. Okay, so you guys see the long way. The easy way is just drag and drop. Okay, but this is the long way. So it's going to rebuild everything. It's going to look for any deltas, changes. And if it doesn't find any changes, it's just literally going to rebuild my my project very quickly, as you can see, right? And then it's going to port it to my phone. Please be aware that when you do this on the phone, it makes it, like I said earlier, very hot. Okay, very, very hot. I didn't realize it. It was in my pocket, just as a good example, and it was like fire in my pocket. Okay, so it shouldn't be a problem, but just in case, maybe it's because I left it on, like on the actual player itself. Because it's so GPU intensive and the stuff that I made happen, it becomes very challenging. All right, so it looks like it built. And now it's running the phone, so I'm just going to go into that little app. Oop. And here I am with GAME2015. So you can see the people in the class can actually see that the app is running. This is what the app should look like by default, right? Notice that now people, unfortunately, at home can't see it. I don't normally do this. I don't record myself typically, but let's see what I can do this time around. So I'm going to go here for a second and change my screen so you can see the app. So this is what it really looks like. I know, it's like really crazy, right? That's me. Hi, how you doing? But this is the app. So if you see the app itself, it actually builds this kind of thing. You can see that there's two screens here, right? And these two screens are kind of got this really weird shape. Well, the way to do that is to get your headset. Can one of you pass me your headset? I want to show the people at home kind of thing. Get your headset. And the headset we're using is the Merge VR headsets. This is the Merge VR headset. It's kind of weird to see. There it is. On the back of the headset, on the strap, there's this little QR code. And what you want to do is take the app itself and scan the QR code on the back. So you take the app. So here's on the app itself. You can see that I'm pressing this little button right here. And you can see that your phone is set to default. I want to switch. It says switch viewer, which is right here. I want to click that switch viewer. And what it's going to do is going to look for, I'm going to say allow. And what it's going to do is going to look for that QR code, right? And if I scan the QR code right here, it's going to switch my viewer so that my, oh, connection error. Let's try that again. Oh yeah, I love it. Just keeps doing it, but failing. Anyways, but what it should do for you is totally work the way it should. Okay, which is here. Thank you very much. Grab that. But what it should do is realign your. You should realign this thing. So what it's going to do is it's going to change the way this thing works. I don't know why it gave me that error. It's the first time that's happened. But what it does, it realigns this thing so that way it's not necessarily this shape, but the shape that works best with your cardboard device. Okay, so that's what this is. Let me switch back now to the screen. All right, sorry about that rude and ugly interruption, but there we go. So that's what this does. So this is the app that we've got going on. Okay, now once I've got it on here, I can literally disconnect it because it's a Google app, right? It's just like an app on your phone. It's no problem. One thing to note is you want to minimize this thing or put it into the background. Don't let it just sit there live like I did. It'll eat up your phone pretty quickly. Okay, so now that we've got this part done, everything's great, but we can't move around. The only thing we can do in the app itself is use the regular controller, right? And for now, what can actually happen is if you actually go into this thing and run it, right? It will, as an example, move around and stuff like this, like as if I have my controller. But my mouse is set up for the look effect. And it's nice that my mouse works, but I'm never going to have a mouse on my device. And I sometimes want to test with a real Xbox controller. So this is the next part that we're going to handle, right? So I've got two Xbox controllers. I've got the Xbox One S controller, which is something that you have to see because some people don't know what that is. Hopefully well, there's my Xbox One S controller. You notice that the control looks a little different than the other one. It has, it's hard to see with the light that I have here, but it has a micro USB port right about here. It's terrible lighting. You can't see it. Let's see if I can get the angle there. There. And it also has this little button here to connect it to your device. I've connected it already to Bluetooth, so my device right now is paired to my Xbox. one controller. So if I turn this on, you can see that I've got a pairing on this device, okay, which is my Samsung 1S device. And you can also use older controllers like, pull out this one. Here's an older controller. This is an Xbox, a regular Xbox 360 controller, right? Now this one unfortunately has a weird connection, a connector. But if you can kind of make this go onto micro USB, it should work as well. Or the Xbox One regular controller from micro USB to micro USB, but it'll connect directly to your phone. So for today's demo, what I want to do is I want to use a controller to connect to Unity, right? And let's talk about how to set up a controller in Unity, right? If you look up, so I'm going to go back to this for a second. If we look up Unity, right, Xbox controller, right, there is a wiki for it, which basically speaks to how it gets mapped. Now, this is the map for Windows. There's also one for Mac or ever. So this is the standard map that you would have for your Xbox controller, okay? So what I want to do is, by default, this X-axis and Y-axis are already pre-mapped for us. But we're going to change some settings here. And there's also this fourth and fifth axis that we want to make work, right? So to test this, instead of doing it in VR, I'm going to test it in a test scene. Remember I told you about that player, prefab? Well, I want to use that player prefab in a test scene now. So let's go back to Unity for a second. I'm going to pass around these controllers in a second so you can check it out for yourself too, all right? So again, I'm in this regular scene. I'm going to save it. So I'm going to save my scene. I've already done this work. It's already deployed to my device, right? And what I want to do here is I want to make a new scene. So I'm going to go to Scenes. I'm going to right-click and create a new scene this time. I'm going to call it Test. The test scene. I'm going to double-click onto it. So now it's going to have my test scene. So I won't corrupt or pollute the scene I just made. I don't want to mess that up. I mean, I made it. It worked hard to do it. It works. It deploys. So what the hell, right? What I want to do here is, though, I want to get my prefab, because I already have my player set up. I'm going to drag and drop it into my scene and get rid of my camera. So I don't need my camera anymore because my player has a camera. And I also had asked you guys to pop into some prototype assets. So in my standard assets, I have something called prototyping. I want to go into prefabs, and I want to grab this floor prototype, which is 64 by 64, and put it in my scene here, just to test with. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my player up above the scene right here in Unity, right? And this is my player. Right now he's facing away, but that's okay. And if I just use this like this, let's just rename the floor prototype into floor, right? And just so that way I don't have to ever do this again, I'm going to go into my prefabs and drag and drop my floor in there. So it's all there for me. I can reuse it, make another one. All right, cool. So I've got my player, and I want to test this thing. And if I press play, right? And now let me just connect one of my controllers. So I've got this old Xbox controller. It has actually its own USB port. And it's actually wireless. It's a wireless Xbox 360 controller that works with Mac and Windows, right? So I'm going to turn it on. Xbox 360 controller. There it is, right? It's connected. And what I'm going to do here in the scene is I want to use this controller to run around with in the scene. And let me just maximize on build here. Right? So what I want to do is in game, I want to maximize on play and press play. And let's see how this works. So there's my maximize. So you can see that I don't have anything moving right now. And there's a couple reasons for this, by the way, that I know I'm gonna figure out. One reason that I can't do this. I press escape here and go up. If I have mobile input on, right, it'll prevent me from doing stuff. So I got to disable mobile input for now. Right? It's going to give me a little message. If I press play again, that should allow me to use at least one part of my Xbox controller, move around. You can see now that I can move around with my Xbox controller left and right. So by default, now we know that the Google VR enables mobile input, which disables my controller, which means I have to do another build with my mobile input disabled, right? If I'm going to use my controller, can't have mobile input and my controller enabled at the same time. That's number one. Two, this won't work right? My mouse look is, this is the mouse, but my other stick doesn't do a darn thing, right? Because my stick is not mapped properly. So I got to remap my stick, right? My right stick. I'm just going to just stop this. And in order for me to do that, I'm going to go to Edit. I'm going to go to Project Settings, and I'm going to go to Input. So here's my Input Manager. And on the right, you can see that I have a number of axes. I have 18 axes by default, right? When I do Get Input Horizontal and Get Input Vertical, you guys may know this already, hopefully you do, that it calls these axes right here. I'm going to change some of these values, though, to make it a little bit more reasonable. So I'm going to make gravity 0 for now. I'm going to change my dead zone to 0.19. That kind of works for me. Sensitivity, I'm going to lower it to about 1, right? And this is the first change I'm going to make. Notice that it says the type is key or mouse button, right? For horizontal, I'm going to make it joystick axis, right? And the next part is my vertical. I'm going to go down here in my vertical, I change the same thing, so make gravity 0. I'm going to make dead 0.19. Oops. 0.19, and sensitivity to 1. These values kind of work a little better for me. Again, the type is joystick axis, right? On the x-axis. If I just try that part, again, I'm just trying the part to make sure it works properly. So again, I can move right, left, and it doesn't drift as much anymore. It snaps to, which is what I want, right? The other thing I want is inside of my my input manager here, I want to change my mouse X and mouse Y. Now, someone earlier in the day asked, well, what if I want both my mouse and my gamepad working at the same time? Well, then you have to change it in code. You have to go in the code and point to something else. Right now, the code that's built into my rigid body FPS controller that comes standard with standard assets, it points to my mouse X and mouse Y inputs. So I got to change them. I got to go to mouse X and notice that it says the same gravity 0, dead is 0. I want dead to be 0.19. That's the values I want to use, right? Sensitivity is going to be 1, right? And instead of mouse movement, I'm going to change to joystick axis. And instead of x-axis, remember we did that thing with the Xbox controller? It can't be x-axis. It's going to be fourth axis. That's what I got to use, the fourth axis. So I'm going to change this from x-axis to fourth axis. Right? I do the same thing for mouse Y. So mouse Y, go in here, change gravity to 0, 0.19 for dead, and sensitivity to 1. Dial up that sensitivity. Now, same thing, instead of mouse, it's going to be joystick axis. Instead of Y axis, it's going to be, that was weird, it's going to be fifth axis, right? And notice also the last one, which all of them have, is get motion from all joysticks. So if I had multiple controllers, which I can, right, then I would have multiple versions of these axes, right, these control points inside my input manager that I would call. All right, so that's that one. So mouse X, mouse Y. Now, one thing to note about the Y axis, because it's mouse look, by default, who plays inverted? Who plays the games, your game inverted? Anybody play a game inverted? I'm an old guy, so I play my game inverted all the time. I drive people crazy. Huh?
Do you do it by accident?
No, I do it. I just do it. It's my thing. No, I'm an old guy, so when I start, so
the first FPS they inverted in Halo.
That's when I learned. That's
by accident.
no, that's what I learned. I learned the old way back in the day, right? When I did Duke Nukem, flight simulators, all that stuff, I played inverted. So all the people that I deal with now, they're all younger than me. They're like, you're crazy, right? You're nuts. You play inverted, something's wrong with you. But I play inverted. So if you're the kind of guy who plays inverted, leave everything as is. If you're not the kind of guy that plays inverted, you need to click invert, actually, right? So if you click invert, it actually plays it the regular way you're used to, which is when you go up, it looks up. When you go down, it looks down. If you don't do that, it'll be inverted like it is now. I'm going to leave it inverted because that's how I like to play, right? But for you guys, you would change this up. Now, realistically, you'd want to have some kind of option in your game to invert your look, as an example, right? You can actually, create an option that goes there and changes your look to make it inverted, which is totally fine. You can make it happen, but there's nothing to do that on your app by default. You have to program all that in. Okay. All right. So cool. I've got this. Well, that means that if I did everything correctly and if I run the game, right, the way it is right now, I should be able to look up and down. Now, this is all with my Xbox controller. Move forward and back, right? And jump with my Y key. All right, so there's my Y key moving around. So all that stuff has been pre-mapped, and I can move around pretty good, okay? So now that I've got that, I can test my VR game, right? I couldn't test my VR game with my mouse. Doesn't make any sense. I want to build, if I'm building it for Xbox controller, I'm going to test it with my Xbox controller. All right, so cool, I've got that. I'm going to escape this and stop this. I'm going to save my scene so I can go back here as a test scene. And I'm going to use this test scene for other stuff later on. But what I want to do is I want to go back to my other scene. Let's go back to my GVR main. And in GVR main now, when I change my inputs, it's for the whole project, not just for a scene, right? So my input, all the things I just made, are going to change here. So if I run this thing now, if I did things properly, right, I should be able to move things with my mouse and have some kind of simulation of how it works. Now take a look at, it's a little rough in the scene itself because of the way Google VR is functioning. It kind of bounces along because my floor is frictionless, right? That's how it kind of works. I can still jump in the scene, and I can still jump on top of this thing. This is what I'm supposed to kind of target and destroy, right, in my scene. But all this stuff is working okay. And if I can do that here, then I should be able to do it on my app. So again, I'm just gonna, I can, if I really want to, I'm not gonna do that here. I can go to build and run, and then redeploy my app to my phone. So that's the way you do it for controller access, and it would totally work with this. Now just to prove this out to you, right? So to make sure that you understand that it works, I'm gonna do the build and run. I should plug in my phone too. Hold on a second. So if I don't plug in my phone, it's not gonna work. Yeah, go ahead. The phone that I already built, you mean?
Yeah, the one you already built is just there in your build folder.
I can just drag and drop it. I can just drag and drop it.
You can drag and drop to your phone.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, hold on. Let me just connect to my Android phone. Oh, let's do it now, man. Let's do it. Let's do it. You want me to drag and drop, right? So let's take a look. So when I did this, I'm not going to go here. Let's cancel for a second, just because Colin asked me to take a look. So let's see if I can explore my phone. So I'm going to go here to my phone. And if you look at if I've connected my phone to my machine properly, I should have this Samsung Galaxy S7 here, right? And if I look in here, you can see that where are my apps? So who knows where the apps are on Android? Here's Android. Here's media. Not there, right? How did I do this before? What was that? That's right. Sorry. If I find it, where is that again? It's an Android, that's right, OBB, this one. So now you see that I have these, this right here. I've got the GVR 2018, and so on. So if I drag and drop this from one to the other, let's just go to, sorry, I just want to go to builds. Actually, I'll just build. I'll build first, and I'll drag and drop. How about that? Right. Sorry. It's in the downloads folder. This download, right? In the downloads folder. Yeah, so what I want to do here, let's just build it first. So I'm going to go File, Build Settings, and I'll just build. So I'll build I do a new build of this APK. There we go. And it's going to build. Let it do its thing. Now, there are changes that I made because I changed the inputs, right? So now the inputs are going to work differently. And we're going to check this out. I want to see if I can make my Xbox One S controller control my phone, which will be a triumph, right? Because now I have full control. I can actually make a full VR game that walks through, similar to what they do with Google Daydream. Google Daydream actually has a controller that allows you to do that. Now, one thing I noticed is that some phones that I've tested today are very choppy, especially if the scene is full of assets. I'm moving from kind of like in a 3D scene, looking from different textures. That's why it's a really good idea, guys, to here it is. To optimize your textures and all that kind of stuff to make the phone as slim as possible. So there's builds. Yeah, anything that helps. So here's my GVR. I'm going to sort of drag and drop it in here, following instructions. There we go. I go back to this thing, my phone. And how does it install, though?
So you navigate to the download folder.
Sorry. Oh, it's inside here, right?
Yeah. If you type in downloads on search.
Yep.
You have like a download folder.
Sorry, it's been a long time. And now things have changed, and I don't own an Android phone. I own an iOS device, right? Downloads. Come over, because it's not showing up. There you go.
So you search for downloads?
Yeah.
Okay, you don't have a download?
Yeah.
Is it Samsung?
It's Samsung.
No, it's Samsung. It's different. So File Explorer.
All right, my files. There we go.
and then
Downloads. Downloaded.
What is it? File storage. Download.
There we go. And then just click onto
it.
it.
To install at first because you haven't allowed unknown
Right.
sources.
Go there.
So settings, unknown sources.
Thank you, Ian.
Okay. Then
Awesome. So it's installing that way. So that's how you do it, right? Good. Now I know. Knowing half the battle. All right. So now I've got it running again, and there it is. It's loading up with this thing. And now here, let's turn on my controller and watch. Take a look. So if I use this now, I can actually go forward and back my controller. See that? So I'm moving forward and back. It's hard to see. I can't. The guys online can't see it, and I'm stuck. Haha. Yeah. Anyways, but it works pretty good. So I'm just going to kind of X out of here and move back. All right, cool. Lots of learnings from me today, too. So very cool. The other way, of course, to do it is the long way, which I talked about earlier, which is to build and run on the device, which is what we did already. So we've done a couple things. We ended up installing everything on the Android device, and everything's working now. Okay, last thing today, and then I want to start looking at your actual games and stuff if I can. So I want to go back to my test scene for a second, right? In my test scene, I have some very simple apps, or very simple objects. So let's go back here. So save my scene. Go back to my test scene. One of the things that I always talk about is, hey, you got to make your game look good, right? And you guys have games. Some people have games that have a maze. Some people have games that are internal, like inside or whatever. Some people are using outside. Well, you can add post-processing effects to that. And I want to talk about the post-processing stack a little bit. So right now, my player, here's my player in my test scene. I'm in my test scene. It's looking over here, and I'm going to rotate him in a second. But what I want to do is go into, again, standard assets, prototyping. I want to grab some basic material. So I want to go to prefabs, and I want to grab a cube. So we'll grab a cube, and I'll pull it into the scene. Here's a cube. And let's also install a lamp. So I'm going to go kind of create a light. Let's put some kind of point lamp. There's a point lamp, which I'm going to bring up, and put it near the cube, maybe on top of the cube somewhere. So we've got a point lamp. Just going to rotate the scene a little bit so we can see what we're looking at here. And zoom in. Okay, what I want to do when I look at my player is, you see the player is not looking at the cube right now. I'm going to rotate him. So I'm going to just rotate this. Instead of 180 degrees, I'm going to rotate to 0. Now he's looking at the cube. But it's kind of boring. He's looking kind of head on, right? And again, if you look at the game, that's what it looks like. I'm going to pull this aside a little bit. He's going to rotate also so he looks at the cube from an angle. He's going to rotate so he looks at the cube. Right? And you can see that I'm looking at the cube now. The game kind of looks like this. I'm looking at the cube from an angle. Right? Actually, just to make it one more, well, I can't change the camera because the player will be kind of unbalanced. Let's just move the player even closer. Right, so I want to kind of move them about there. All right, so there's the cube, a little bit lower. Cool. All right, so there's my cube, and I want to add a post-processing effect. I've got a lamp that's there, right? And my lamp right now, by default, is white. So let's change the color so we can see it. We'll make the lamp kind of yellowish, a yellow lamp, and we'll increase the intensity of the lamp so it's quite bright. All right, so if you see what it looks like in game, it looks like this. Okay, so kind of some kind of yellow lamp that's on there, right? Now, inside a game world, this could make all the difference of something that looks kind of cool or something that looks really bad, right? So let's maybe reduce it a little bit. So post-processing. In order for me to get the post-processing stack, it's on the asset store. And if I go to the asset store, and if I look for a post-processing stack, one day when it gets there. Of course, the connection in this room, I'm doing a bunch of stuff, so that's probably why it's slow. If I go to post-processing stack and press enter, you can see that you'll get this Unity post-processing stack. However, one thing to note, the post-processing stack is old, right? And we want to use version 2. So I've put version 2 on Slack for you. The way you can get it is you can get it off of GitHub, right? So there's GitHub. This is the post-processing stack from Unity, right? Download it. You unzip it. I've given you the zip version on Slack, but I have it locally. And the way you install it is, so I'm going to go to Assets here. I want to put the post-processing stack over here. And the way to do that is, if I already have it, I'm going to go to my File Explorer here, and I'm going to go to my Downloads. And you can see that I got post-processing over here, and I think at the bottom, I've got my post-processing folder. Let's do it by alphabetical. Here's post-processing 2, right? And I've got this post-processing and documentation for post-processing. I want to kind of bring them both over, but this is a very cool thing to have. I want to kind of drag and drop this folder right into here. So I'm going to grab this post-processing folder, now that it's been unzipped, and drag it right into here. And what this will do is Unity will translate it, right? All the files, the scripts, and everything, just like I'm importing a custom package. That's what it's going to do. So there's packages out there that are custom written by third parties. This is the way you drag them in. Just drag the folder into Unity, and away you go. Then you have that package. No, they can be folders like this. As long as they're coded the right way, you're good to go. All right, so cool. So now that I've got this, I've got the post-processing stack here. It's actually added a couple of things. So there's 3 things I need to make my post-processing work. I need a profile. Okay, so that's number 1, profile. So here inside of the assets somewhere, I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to create a new post-processing profile. Right? So if you look over here, post-processing profile, this will only appear if you've installed the post-processing stack. Okay? So the post-processing profile, I'm going to call PP2 because it's version 2, post-processing profile. And notice over here, it says add effect. Right? What I can do is I can choose the effect add. Now, for those people who are students of CG, computer graphics, like you guys, who are doing all these wonderful things with computer graphics, not just cubes rotating in space, right? I'm being facetious. You can actually create shaders, right? And the shader programs, what they can do is they can do these post-processing effects by using something called FBOs, frame buffer objects, right? So frame buffer objects are just another array of data, right? And in the post-processing pipeline, what you would do is you would put this in, create shaders, both the vertex shader and let's suppose the fragment shader. And as your objects go through the pipeline, you can have a special effect happen. For example, in our case, we want to have things like bloom and color correction, all that kind of stuff. Now, that's quite intensive to program, and if you don't know how to do CG, that's challenging. But here, Unity's helped us out and has already pre-done all the work for us. So here I can add an effect. If I click this Add Effect button, I can go Unity, and then I can choose Bloom. So there's my Bloom effect. And I can also choose, let's choose a few of them. I definitely want to have ambient occlusion. Now this is screen space ambient occlusion. And I can also include something like a vignette, which is kind of cool, maybe. And definitely color grading, which is like color correction. Color grading is kind of makes the scene look a certain way. I'm going to kind of do that. The rest you can play around with yourself, all right? But here's bloom, ambient occlusion, vignette, and color grading. So those are the effects I want as post-processing effects to have access to. Okay, so that's the first thing, add a post-processing profile, right? Part 2, I need to add some kind of volume, all right? So right here in the scene, I'm going to add an empty object. I'm going to call this post-processing object, right? Or you can call this anything you want. Basically, it's just a post-processing control object. That's what it is, right? And I'm going to add a new component. Instead of GVR, I'm going to kind of filter on post and go to volume. There we go. And what this volume is going to do is point to the profile. So it's going to kind of say, okay, which profile am I pointing to? I'm pointing to this profile here, right, which is the post-processing profile. And you can see that this comes through. Now, there's an option that says is global, right, is global. I want to turn this on because I'm going to make it work for all my entire scene, but you can actually uncheck this if you only want it to work for certain things, like bloom. Yeah, so I want to bloom my bullets. I want to bloom my whatever, right? And remember, this is everything. You can also make as many of these profiles as you want, right, that have only bloom or only a vignette or only something else. So you can apply these effects where you like. Yeah, you can do all kinds of stuff. Yeah. So this is really cool stuff. So first of all, what I want to do is, so this is step 2. So step 1 is create a profile. Step 2 is make an object with the volume. Step 3 is I need a layer, right? And I'm going to put the layer on the camera. So there's my camera. I'm just going to collapse these for a second. And at the bottom, right, I'm going to add a new layer, post-processing layer, right? And what the layer does is it really targets a certain layer that I want. Right now, I don't have a specific layer. It's not targeting any layer at all. Right now, there's nothing that's being targeted, right? But I can create one. Let's make a new layer. Let's call this post-processing. Something that I want, anything on my post-processing layer will be affected. A post-processing layer, right? And I want to apply that layer to my camera. And I also want to apply it to the layer, the post-processing layer object. I want to apply that as well. And to my post-processing object, I want to apply that layer there as well. Once I've done all those layer adjustments, save the scene. Okay. And we can start seeing the effects. Now watch here. So once I go to bloom, I want to turn bloom on. You can see that I can turn the intensity of the bloom and the threshold. And what bloom does, it kind of adds a blurry effect to the scene, and it basically increases the bright areas and it blurs the rest of the area. So it blurs this area. So here there's a bit of a blur on this. Right here you can see there's a bit of a blur. Depending on where my threshold is, right, I can increase or decrease this blurry effect. I can change other values here as well. So kind of a bloom. You can see how that turns that on. Next is ambient occlusion. And again, I'm not running this yet. So if I ran this, you can see what it would look like. So this is what the actual game looks like. All right now. So I don't have bloom much on right now. Let's look at ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion, what it does is it does default shadow mapping. Notice there's some shadows here, but if I want to add a thicker shadow here across this area here, I can turn the ambient occlusion on. And I can change the intensity of the ambient occlusion, right? So normally it's multi-scale volume, right? And what I can do is I can change things like the radius. Take a look how that changes already. I can change things like the radius. It's all post-processing. So basically what I'm doing is I'm drawing my scene, and then I'm doing something else to my scene at the end, right? By using a shader program, okay? So notice how there's a thicker line down here. It's like almost like fake shadows that I'm adding to the scene. And I'm baking them in before it's not real-time shadows, right, kind of thing. So for anything that's static, you can add this to your scene. They do a lot of screen space ambient occlusion when it comes to adding life or depth to a character, right? So that's what ambient occlusion looks like.
I take it that's do that with,
Wow. It's actually being done per frame.
Oh, it is being done.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. That's why so when you turn bloom and ambient occlusion on in your games, it's an extra effect, right? So if I turn it on, I can see I can turn both effects on, right? And I can also, vignette is neat because what vignette does, if you want to make it so that the screen is kind of looks at this area right here, I can turn it on. Let's turn the vignette effect on. And what I can do is I can change the intensity of the vignette, right? So here's my vignette intensity and the smoothness and so on. And the roundness. I'll turn this on in a second. You'll see what I'm talking about. So So what it does is if I go to masked, here's my masked intensity. And if I go to the, I can add a mask if I want to as well. What this does, it adds almost like this screen around this thing. Let's see if I can just turn these. Sorry, I've got a limited amount of space. So I want to turn this on, but I want to show you this. So mask is classic. Here's the color. I can change the color, and I can change the center of the vignette. And the intensity, if I go to like something like 2, you can see that it basically masks the entire object. Take a look. Right, so that's kind of an interesting thing. I can change this to 1. I can mask the vignette. So almost like adds, you know, kind of a. If you had a character who was dying, you can kind of make it so they can't see as much. That kind of stuff. You can use a vignette to create a circular effect on the area. Yeah. So if you change the color, so if let's say the character's dying, my vignette is red, and then he's dying. So you can change the intensity. So you can kind of go, oh God. He's dying. Take a look. He's dying. And he's dead, right? So kind of a neat effect. Again, it's all post-processing stuff that you can add in. Really cool. We'll turn this off and ambient occlusion off so you can see a difference. And now color grading, which is really cool. Color grading actually adds a tone to the entire scene, right? So if I turn it on, and if I turn it on to neutral, you can see how it kind of neutralizes the entire tone. It kind of regrades everything, or it's a color correction. Right? I can also make it so that it is a little cooler, a cooler scene. Or I can use a custom effect. And this is really cool. What the custom effect does is it allows me to change the temperature and the tint and even the colors, red, green, and blue, of the entire scene. So let's say, for example, I want to make this temperature warmer. I want to make it a warmer scene. I can increase the temperature, right, of the colors of the scene and the tints. Right? Yeah. And then what I can do physically is I can make it so that it is redder. So here's I'll make it more of a redder scene. And now you can't see it because I'm not playing. But what you can do is you can add more. Make sure this is working. And sometimes hard to see too because, guys, what I'm doing is I'm broadcasting. So whenever I broadcast something, it's like sometimes what I see on my screen doesn't work on your screen. So I can turn this up higher and the blue, and I'm not seeing any effect, which is kind of bad. Because typically what we can see is the effect of the gamma. Yeah. So see, it says HDR color grading won't look correct. Switch to linear or use LDR. Yeah. So I got to turn this mode on. So mode definition. There we go. And that should high definition will work. Oh, but these tones work. These presets are working nicely. That's what it does. Yeah, these are all nice. And now you can see this kind of turn on. Here's something that looks. So I can make that color tint work like this. So the whole scene tints, and I can change the the red scene more into no red, so more of a green scene. So I can adjust certain scenes that I want them to look more blue or more red. And sometimes this can do things like create an effect that it's going to nighttime. I can make it look so it's like more wintry. I can, there's different effects you can do, and it's all post-processing in the post-processing stack. It's after everything else, and it's applied to everything in the scene, right? The camera is itself, it's being applied almost like a filter on the camera. That's what's happening, right? That's what's going on the camera. Yeah, exactly, right? So really cool stuff, and all done with the post-processing stack, right? So to make it look really interesting. Where this really plays out well, guys, is if you have some kind of tunnels. So let's say, for example, I'm making a scene, I'm in VR, and I want to make it a real spooky scene, or if you have a dark scene. I think someone had a real dark game. You guys had a kind of a dark game, right? So imagine putting a post-processing stack effect around lights. And you can do things like chromatic aberration. That's another effect that we can add in. Let's take a look at that. So one thing we didn't add in is chromatic aberration. So in the effects, I can add another effect. I can add chromatic aberration, right? And what that does, if I just turn, I'm just going to turn the color grading off. All right, so everything is off. I can also turn on chromatic aberration, right? So I can turn it on. And what you can do with it is I can increase the intensity of the chromatic. So take a look at that chroma aberration. It's right on the edges here,
Also, like,
right?
pops the edges.
Yeah, that's right. So it kind of makes it so that there's a chromatic problem with the edges, right? And along lights, it actually works a little more interesting. So almost like a blurred effect, right? So really kind of cool. You can also add a spectral LUT if you had a texture, and it would take the LUT effect on the end, the lookup table. That's what a LUT stands for. So you have a lookup table that kind of makes this effect whatever color you want, right? So kind of really, really cool. And then we can, of course, combine them all. I can combine bloom and vignette and color grading and all that kind of stuff to create a scene that gives, kind of a, an effect of whatever we like. So, for example, I can make the intensity less bloomy and more gloomy. Sorry to say it that way, right? So I can make it more, I can also add film grain. There's an actual film grain effect. So if I go back to the post-processing stack, I can add kind of a grain effect to the whole thing. It's taxing. I'm just telling you, you can do this. You guys maybe don't know about it, but I'm showing you so you can do it, right? So that's it. In the grain, I can turn the grain on. I can also change the intensity of the grainy effect. See how that looks? So that kind of makes it more grainy. And I can change the size of the grain to make it smaller or smaller, bigger or smaller. And it kind of creates this area where, let's see how it looks in real play now. Where in play, you can see it's in real time, right? That now I can't use these buttons to move, but I can use my Xbox 360 controller. That's why I have my Xbox 360. So I test everything here before I go into VR, right? Because that's what I'd want to do. So you can see now that I can kind of move here, and I can also add a blurring effect with, so let's go out here one more time, one more thing, which is kind of neat. So I got grain, and let's add one more effect. Let's add depth of field. Yeah. First, for things that are fast, like fast acting.
Really fast. Other than that, because they try to apply motion right now.
Like maybe so like a fist punching, something like that, some kind of special effect where something's zooming away. Kind of looks neat, right? To give so it's because you can't really give a sense of speed, right?
Try to do it sometimes with like just standard character walking. Look right, motion blur, it blurs all the trees and stuff.
All that stuff, yeah. It doesn't.
Turn it off, it looks so much better.
It may not look right.
For fast movement.
So let's look at some focal distance. I can take a look at this as well. Now, yeah, this is neat. So again, so let's say, for example, I want my focal distance to be very close, right? So that is, I can make everything kind of blurry. So let's say, for example, the guy, he's damaged, right? You can change your focal distance so it looks like he's blurry for a second or whatever. So you can do that kind of thing where he's doing one of these, right? Now, if you did this in VR, you'd probably make the guy sick. But here, let's say, for example, I left it like this, and I just played the game, right? And you can see that everything kind of, as I get closer, you can see that it's less blurry. And as I go out further out, right? So there we go. So let's see how that's nice and sharp. But if I go away, it kind of is a little blurry. My depth of field is kind of way out there, right? So really kind of cool effects, all post-processing and all done frame by frame, right? So really cool stuff. You can see the film grain and everything else. Really a neat effect. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today. To help you guys with your game and all that stuff to make it look more realistic. Again, we're talking about VR here. So just to recap, your project, administration-wise, your alpha version of your project is due tonight at midnight. So you need your a link to your GitHub repo, your project file zipped up on Blackboard. The next version, I think version 3 of your game design document. So anything updated. What I mean by that is just an updated version of your GDD. Just in case you've added something or you modified something, a new screenshot, something like that, you want to kind of add as you move on. So at the end of the day, when we do our exam, by the way, the exam is scheduled for the last week of classes, right? The exam, there's no exam in this course. We're doing presentations, right? So for you to do presentations, what I'm going to do not next week, because next week is Good Friday, but the week after, I want to take a look at, start thinking about your presentations. We're going to look at that old pitch presentation you put together for the first submission. I want to look at that and see how we can modify it so that you guys are all ready to go for your final presentation, because your final presentation is going to be worth a whack of marks. Now, in order for you to get marked for your final presentation, you must be physically present, okay? Just like an exam, all right? So not all of you have to speak, but you all have to stand up and be a team and show off your project. You have to demonstrate your project. We may be in a class that we have a document camera where you can actually show your project on the screen, if we can. I may also ask you to record a little demo inside Unity on YouTube. I may ask you to do that, and not for me, but for as an artifact we can keep to show other people and so on what you've done. YouTube, Google Hangouts. It doesn't have to be something that's crazy. And then at the end of the day, it's going to be worth a whack of marks. So please, we're not going to let it go. So right now we're 4 weeks left before end of semester. 4 weeks. I know we have to just get through it. It's just a gauntlet, guys. We have 4 more weeks left, right? It's a gauntlet. Okay, it's a perseverance test. Okay, we have to get through these 4 weeks, and if you guys get everything done, we'll be all fine. Okay. Things to note. 2 weeks from now, your beta is due, okay? And then 2 weeks after that, your final release is due, okay? So your beta is really what we're looking at for most of your assets would be in at this time. Any levels you're going to add in are in, all that kind of stuff. And then from beta to final release, all we're going to do is do testing. So I'm going to be coming in and looking at your apps. I want to see how things are testing. You should be running on your phones. If you're running it on a special device, like I know one group is using an Oculus, you have to bring that device in. I want to be able to see your app every time we get together, all right, to see what your progress is like, because we want to test it, and we're going to share it among each other. So I want this group, as an example, to share their app with this group and this team, so that everyone has a sense of, hey, let's give some feedback to these people on how things are going, okay? So that's the stuff that's coming up, and that's all I wanted to talk about today. Remember, if you haven't had a chance to do your exam, your midterm exam for this course, it closes at 6. Okay, so have a chance to do it. You have two attempts to do this thing until the end of day today, 6 o'clock, not midnight, 6. And then we're done with the midterm exam, and you won't have another exam in this course, which is pretty cool, all right? Any questions around what we've talked about today? All right, so for the remainder of class, for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to come around, I'm going to take a look at your projects, and then I'll open up the Dropbox on Blackboard so you can submit. And that's it for me.